Give us 30 minutes each week to discover the trends that are shaping the future of retirement with That Annuity Show. We bring you conversations with industry leaders who are revolutionizing financial products, technology, and distribution channels. Hello, and welcome to another episode of That Annuity Show. I'm your host, Tisa Rabin Marshall, and I am joined here with Ramsey Smith and Bruno Karen, my two phenomenal co-hosts. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Always good to be back.
Awesome. Bruno?
Fantastic, as always, especially with our guest today.
Absolutely. I'm very excited for today's episode and conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Bruno, to introduce today's guest.
It's my pleasure to introduce Maria Ferrante-Schepis. She is the founder of Think Worthy Consulting, and she also serves on two boards, which are Better Life and Homesteaders. I don't know for you, but it is very hard to go to an insurance conference where Maria is not speaking. Her presence is significant in this industry through not only her speaking but her books as well, and of course her role and just her involvement through her different roles. So it is a pleasure to welcome you, Maria.
Thank you so much, Bruno and Ramsey and Tisa, for having me on the show today. Give a little background, if that's
Please.
Okay. Yeah, I know you already introduced me in a way that I'm extremely proud of, and thank you for saying such kind words. I have been in this industry for a very long time, above 4 decades, let's put it that way, and grew up in the industry. I've worked for several insurance carriers as an employee and very much involved in the marketing and product and sales side of things, and then went into consulting in the in 2010 so that I could make a bigger difference in what I thought the future of the industry should look like. And that's when I joined Maddox Douglas, and I spent many years there doing thought leadership, writing books, things like that. As you mentioned, doing a lot of speaking and consulting on innovation, specifically related to what sort of know as the sold not bought category. And recently I started my own consulting company called Think Worthy Consulting. And as the name implies, what I do through Think Worthy is to help companies in the space think about challenges differently so that different solutions could emerge, because there's so many things that our industry has been struggling with, and for good reason, which I've talked a lot about in my last book. And then the worthy part is what is worthy of our time and attention. We have so much going on in all of our lives today that our to-do lists are very long, but our to-don't lists, we don't necessarily stop and take a look at and create, and we have to. So that prioritization is important. So it's thinking and then what's worthy of thought. And so that's what I'm doing now, but still very, very committed to this industry and the various challenges that so many are passionate about solving.
So outside the box thinking in the insurance industry, I think no one's going to argue that we need this. So thank you. So my first question, comment, or thought is that, through reading the book, everyone who read your book can, probably is not able to count the number of times empathy is actually stated in the book, and that's something you stress. And empathy is, not necessarily the number one word we think of in the business and the corporate world, but as I was reading your book, the more I understood was that, empathy in this particular context is really about understanding others. We are in a complex environment, and you have people that have different objectives, different roles, different careers, and people, manage sales, people check boxes, people calculate reserves. And the idea is to bring all of those people together to kind of think in the same, not just in silos, but try to understand how everyone fits in in this entire ecosystem. And with empathy, things are much smoother. I mean, am I characterizing this the right way? Or, I mean, I'm sure you can bring some nuances to that.
Sure, absolutely. And nuance is one of my favorite words. In fact, I probably should have mentioned the name of the book, just for anybody who's not familiar, is Unfair Comparisons, Nuancing the Sold Not Bought Category, which is the sequel to Flirting with the Uninterested, Innovating in the Sold Not Bought Category to Go. And it's the look back. The new book is the look back on the last 10 years and very much looking at why many of the innovation, tech developments, the things that the industry has really tried to do to modernize itself have not met expectations. And really does come down to nuance, to your point, Bruno. And empathy is a big part of that. And it filters through a lot of different threads. So I'll just say that first. And then state that the overarching nuance that I believe was missed over the course of this time is that life insurance and annuities, because I know this is the Annuity Show. So annuities and life insurance are in a category that economics lessons would tell us is called negative demand. What that means is not that there's no need, there's tons and tons of need. It means that demand must be cultivated. And so what that sets up is this sold not bought dynamic, which then puts somebody with the care and concern of getting somebody to take action in that sales role, which can sometimes turn into being pushy, coming hardened when people say no, when they meet up with resistance. And then it becomes much more calculated, transactional, and all those kind of things come out of it. And empathy is really that thread of humanity that helps us understand why the feelings are there and whether or not we are experiencing those same feelings or have had that shared experience. The ability to sort of feel it along with somebody else is really what empathy is. And so it takes two major forms, although it's pervasive throughout, is with the client or with the prospect. How are they feeling about what's happening? And the other is with agents and advisors who I believe have been under nurtured in the area of empathy. There's been a lot of this sort of, well, just put on your big boy pants or your big girl pants and push through the fear that you have of selling and get past it. And that's not playing anymore in today's world. And it wasn't great before, but it's even more difficult now to make that work.
So is that the see, first of all, Maria, it's great to see you again. We first met 10, 12 years ago, probably about the same time that you wrote the last book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was at my prior employer and your, I guess, earlier days at Maddox Douglas. So great to see you again. So you talk about the unfair comparison. So is what you're talking about, are those the seeds of what the unfair comparison is? How should we think about that, that phrase?
Yeah, the unfair comparisons, the book is looking at specifically 21 nuances that I believe were missed in the course of the last decade or so of innovation in the insurance space. And those nuances are things that happen that we don't necessarily notice, or we don't put our finger on correctly, or we mischaracterize or misunderstand, or miss completely, like I said, so it could be, well, this failed. This didn't work. Why? Well, because it failed, or there's no real drilling down on what actually happened. So the unfair comparison part of it comes into play when there are these things that we do where we try to make this industry into something that it's not and want it desperately to be like categories that are not negative demand categories and have more of the normal economic dynamics to it, like the type of demand that is just there. Like if we're trying to compare it to retail or Amazon or Google or things that people actually seek out, it's just the nature of the category. And we've wanted to change it, and changing it has all kinds of different problems and challenges associated with it. And so there are a bunch of unfair comparisons, and there in the book, there are also some guide points to get us to fairer comparisons, meaning instead of comparing this industry to ones that are unfair, maybe compare them to ones that are more like this industry in those ways, so that we can become inspired by them versus being frustrated by the ones that we're not And that's where unfair comparisons really comes from.
So what are some of the, well, I guess, what are some of the nuances? And I mean, there's 21 of them, so we definitely won't have the luxury of getting through all of them in this, in this podcast. But just to kind of tease this out a bit for our listeners, what do you think are some of the key nuances and key solutions?
Well, the overarching one, as I said, is need doesn't equal demand. And that has been something we have really, that's probably the biggest one, top of the list, that all the others sort of funnel from. So as I said, negative demand versus the other types of demand. So what happened there is that you saw a lot of D2C startups that looked at the vast unmet need in the marketplace. Oh, all these people are either underinsured or they're not planning for their retirement or whatever they're doing, and said, if we build a platform that makes it easier, takes the friction out of the process, the administrative part of it, underwriting, whatever it might be, people will buy. And I must admit that I was probably in that school of thought myself a decade or more ago, and may have over-indexed in that area as well. But on the look back, what we realized, or what I realized, is that taking the friction out of the process is great customer experience table stakes and something that people would expect, but it doesn't make them buy. It doesn't. And that's where so many expectations were unmet. Because you think about it, I talk about it like, this is one of the nuances, like an invisible wall. So on one side of the wall is all the people that have unmet need. On the other side of the wall are the people that actually have decided to do something about it. And the number of people on the first side versus the second is drastically different. And the way they get over the wall is through the work of advisors, or people, I should say. And then there's some nuances here too that I want to talk about. Is through people who care enough to pull them over. And so some of those folks are professionals and they're advisors, and that's the job that they do. They create the demand. But there's also other times where there's people that are creating that demand without even realizing it or without even trying. And those are just day-to-day conversations that people may be having with their friends, their family, funeral directors, anybody who is engaging them in a conversation. But without that engagement, getting them over the wall doesn't really happen. And so the misunderstanding was that we could create demand with digital technology. We couldn't really create the demand. I mean, we could, but it doesn't cost less than it does with human advisors. It actually costs more to do advertising and promotion and things like that. But it was still not meeting expectations. So that's the biggest one, I would say. But then there's a lot of others that kind of fall off of that.
So I was guilty of that same misplaced optimism. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So
we're all in that boat.
So I hear you. So I just want to maybe double click a little bit in the same direction. I guess there's education, there's human behavior. I kind of come to the conclusion that education in some senses, it's important and it should be available, but it's overrated in the sense that the arc of education can't ever move as quickly as the arc of need. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on education versus really what you described there as sort of trust-based discussions, right? Or other behavioral elements of basically getting past that invisible wall.
You're hitting on a very important nuance, Ramsey. And when I hear the word education, I kind of put it in that same category of pushing a rope. And it's also something that people don't seek out unless they're already thinking about the topic, right? And so I think the industry says, well, we need to educate better. We need to do this. We need to do that. And that's not wrong. It's just the manner in which they believe that people will consume it is off base. So one of the other nuances that I talk about in the book is this notion of a two-way exchange. Two-way exchange is to me one of the most important aspects of creating demand, getting them over the wall, and even having them become educated. Because if they want education, it's out there. I mean, every company's putting out information. It's not bad. I mean, there might be some bad stuff out there, but there's good information at everyone's disposal. And now with AI, you can really get much more curated information on any topic that you want. So if people want it, it's out there. The idea of pushing it out there doesn't help. The two-way exchange, and I'll tell you a story about how this light bulb went on in my head, is we were doing research during my days at Maddox Douglas many, many times. And one of the subject groups we were looking at is people who would never buy life insurance, like the hard doubters, the people who said, no way, no how, I'm never doing that. And as our researchers would have these conversations with them and just kind of ask them a little bit about it, ask them about their background, their family, what they care about, why they believe their need is what it is. We listen to them changing their mind sometimes and saying, maybe I should consider it and all of that. And while the people on the other side of the glass, with the client was like, yeah, give them an application, get it. That was not the point. The point is, why did this happen? And it wasn't because you just got them at the right time. It was because they were taking the time to have this exchange with another person. It could have been an advisor, but in this case, it was a researcher who had no ulterior motive other than to learn. But the big question is, what put the person in the seat to begin with to allow that exchange to happen? And it was a $150 check. That was the motivation to get them to sit still long enough and have a conversation. So while we can't necessarily write $150 checks to everybody in the world who has a need, we have to have some reason for them to sit still, or hypothetically sit still, and have a two-way exchange with somebody, anybody, about this topic. And if they do, the chances of them taking further steps becomes much greater. So it's less about education and more about a problem of time and attention. So it's think of it as what's going to get somebody's attention long enough to have that exchange.
Yeah, capturing the attention to drive the awareness to lead to education. I think it goes back to what you've been talking about, really the role of an advisor, a producer, or another, form of a professional that's in a position to engage and push them along in the journey, and probably showing up with some empathy as well.
Probably is
a lot of it.
It has to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It has to be. It's not even optional anymore, I believe, because the technical part, this is another nuance in the book, is the thinking about, you can't not think about technology and the idea of what is AI going to do to the profession. And the way I look at it is a division of labor. It's anything that's irrational, meaning that it's emotionally driven, is really the job of a human being. And empathy is on the top of that part of the list. That's the ultimate. Then there's some other things underneath that also are somewhat irrational. When I say irrational, I don't mean it as a bad thing. I mean it as it's all about emotion. There's no real logic driving it. But anything that's driven by the logical side or the rational side, the AI can do it all. And it's going to be able to do even more in the future. So while the technical expertise is what has typically differentiated advisors in the past, now it's not. Now it's going to be, if it's not already, it already is, the empathy piece of it, coupled with the ability to do the technical stuff, either on their own or with AI or some combination of both. But if they don't have the empathy, then people will not trust.
Yeah, a very low-tech approach, no technology involved. I remember when my daughter was younger, a life insurance professional agent sitting down with me, and it was nothing about product or riders or terms or premiums. It was all about a yellow, tear sheet, pad of paper, lined paper, and a pen. If you weren't here, what would you want somebody to know about your daughter's favorite snack and her bedtime routine? And it only went 4 questions in, and it was like, if that's important to you, imagine the bills and all, and he built up to. So there was no conversation at the end except for, yes, I need this. And that's how he led me down that path. I will never forget that interaction. And obviously there's a lot of emotion and empathy that comes in that type of interaction. And I still remember it. It was 18 years ago.
Wow. So that made an impact on you. And so he wasn't leading with like, oh, this is the greatest whiz bang rate of return that you can, That's
It had nothing to do with the monetary or the product or anything. So I definitely can relate to what you're describing, and thinking through some of the interactions I've had in the industry with top agents and agencies. You see that common thread in their success as well. So I definitely agree with you. If it's okay, I want to take a shift to technology, because that, of course, is you talked about where what we think about and how we place worthiness on what we're doing, and I want to talk a little bit about that because it certainly is a top priority, ongoing. And I wonder if when you did the reflection back on the last 10 years, the lessons, nuances that we could apply to our current times. I know AI is sort of like top of mind for everyone in the technology curve, but there are other, emerging technologies and kind of waves happening as well, or shifts, I should say, happening. So, without spoiling your third book, any future next 10-year that we can apply to our current moment from a
yeah.
technology and driving innovation within our organization.
Well, you are hitting on a great topic, and I don't think there's going to be a third book, but I didn't think there was going to be a second one either.
Never say never.
I should never say never, but you're hitting on something that is near and dear to my heart, and it is that biotech is that next wave, because the advances that are being made now in what is happening to the human longevity span, because this industry, life insurance and annuities, are there for the lifespan aspect of it, longevity, living, and premature death, obviously, but then income in retirement and income during that time frame. But when you think about the possibility of living another 20, 30, 40 years, which is possible. I mean, think about it. The advances that are being made in all cancer, diabetes. Look at what happened with just diabetes and weight management in the last decade with GLPs and all GLP-1 drugs and things like that. I had a client at Maddox Douglas who made pharma devices, not drugs, but like syringes and things that get drugs into your body. And they were scared to death of what was going to happen when the cure for diabetes was around, because 80% of their business was insulin. And they were completely right about how that time horizon looks. So that we had to do things to help them repurpose their superpowers and all that. However, the rate of speed in which biotechnology is improving is to me, the big next wave. And so our industry has to think about, what does that mean when people are living longer, but they're not just living longer in a nursing home or in a long-term care facility. They may be living longer, better lives, which is a great thing. But then what does that do to income too? Or think about another area would be further technology that democratizes access to things, where the cost of certain parts of daily life are actually reducing dramatically. So when that cost is shifting around, how do we think about what that society looks like, and what should this industry be really focused on? Is it still delivering money at certain intervals, or is it something else? Because
That's very interesting.
if you think about it, then this is one of the first things I talk about in the book, is the insurance industry is built on a sharing, pooling model, right? The sharing economy is kind of a newfangled word that we've heard about in the last 10, 15 years, and all about, the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world. But we're really the first ones to use the sharing model, and we get no credit for it. But that is the superpower of what we do. We take assets from lots of people, and then we dole them out when people need it. We give access to something versus having to own risk. So what else could we use that for? That to me is huge. And I did talk about this towards the end of the book. I had this wild idea that I think could be an application of our superpower, but I don't know that anybody has the appetite to even think about it. It's the idea of getting access to some of these biotech technologies or new drugs or whatever they might be, like before you can afford them. because they're going to be very, very expensive at the beginning. So does that mean that the people who need them won't be able to get access to them, and then they're going to die, and then other people will get access to it later? Why couldn't we create a futures product that allows you to buy in now for a future date? I mean, that is a use of the industry's superpower, but maybe people wouldn't even think it was our job, but it could be. So that's, to me, what I think that next wave looks like. It maybe way out there, but I don't know. I mean, the way that the pace of change is going right now, it could be a lot closer and during our lifetime that we see this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the pace of change is definitely accelerated. And you talk about things that are top of mind always. I mean, longevity is a conversation, whether you're talking about insurance or annuities. So that's an interesting, you were talked about the unfair comparisons. That's a very interesting fair comparison to figure out how do we kind of leverage what's happening in that industry to make sense or
I
give
think
us an
that's much more
opportunity.
fair.
Yeah,
Even though
much more
it's
fair.
wild, it's still more fair because there's a lot of similarities in the dynamics. And another, nuance that I talk about is this whole idea of a wicked problem versus a tame problem. And wicked problems are not necessarily about evil, but it's a word that's used to describe things that are in social policy making. It's basically human behavior that's erratic, irrational, and doesn't follow an engineerable thread. A tame problem is one that you can engineer, even though it might be complex, like building a skyscraper or flying a plane. Once you figure out how to do it, you can do it over and over again because it follows the same pattern. Wicked problems don't. They're like, you have to chip away at them, unravel them. And sometimes in trying to do stuff, you actually make it worse before you make it better. And these problems that we're talking about here are considered wicked problems. And the engineerable parts, I think we've done a really good job of, which is like all of that automation. And, it's not perfect yet, but it's a lot better than it used to be. But the wicked part is, again, how the human interacts with it. And so the health world, the world of well-being, now mental illness is becoming a big part of that, is all tangled into wicked problems. And so I do believe it's much more fair to compare to industries that have those.
Yeah, I think that, look, it's a very insightful and important tension in the insurance space. Insurance companies, are really based around being backward looking and making decisions going forward with some kind of adjustment for what the future looks like in order to take on risk from policyholders. What you're saying to those is very true, that medical advancements, whether they happen independently of the carriers or if they're in some way funded by the carriers, whether they're health insurance providers or life insurance providers or long-term care providers, you can see some synergy there going forward, but it's too early to figure out what the ROI is for any particular investment there on the part of the carriers. And I think that's probably what's going to be something that needs to be continued, sort of evaluated and explored over time. But I think you're right. I think we've got a future that's very uncertain and uncertain in some very good ways, right? As a result of everything that's happening.
Well, you also bring up a really important nuance there, Ramsey, as you were talking, and I don't want to have your listeners miss that. And you were talking about ROI. And what that leads me to wanting to point out is one of the other nuances is that not all innovation is created equally. And there's a whole entire chapter on portfolio of purpose, and that links to a methodology of looking at innovation as a portfolio, similar to an investment portfolio where you have high risk investments and low risk investments and things in between, and that maintaining an asset allocation is the key to getting the returns you're looking for, right? But there are some things that are going to be in a category of innovation where you don't want to make big bets because they are high risk, but you want to take some small calculated risks, and so that you can learn and see where the thread is taking you. And so if you try to dip your toe into a long range, high risk, high uncertainty area and then expect an ROI from that alone, you're going to be disappointed. So you need to look at the whole picture as your ROI, including the things that oh, I do this and I'll get that in return. It'll be like like the evolutionary versus the revolutionary versus the other styles of innovation. And so looking at it at a portfolio is the right way to look at it versus initiative by initiative. Because something like we just talked about, guarantee whoever brings it up and tries to invest in it, they're going to be disappointed looking at it only by itself and not with an entire portfolio of other ideas that they're working on.
Yeah, no, innovation is definitely a journey. It brings its false starts. You and I both have the privilege to serve on boards of carriers that actually invest in innovation. So I'm definitely on the same page. Definitely on the same page with you there.
Great. Great.
All right. Bruno, I'm going to turn it over to you for, since this is Maria's episode, I will not say final thoughts, but maybe any final nuances that we should cover before we wrap up today's episode.
Well, so all right. So looping back from the beginning, empathy, obviously the important topic, and the two-way exchange. And the two-way exchange is such an important topic that Maria opens the two-way exchange chapter with a quote from Pink Floyd. So that kind of tells you how important that is, and that is there anybody out there from the very famous song "Comfortably Numb"? So no, that's I mean I love how the way you bring other thoughts. Risk pooling, obviously, money is fungible, and it's kind of the only currency. It's the only way to think, but there are other ways to think, and risk pooling units of other services or goods. That's definitely forward thinking that we'll probably hear it back in 30 years and say, oh, we should have done that earlier.
Could have done that. Yes, right.
We could have done that earlier, right? It's very sad to say, to your point, some people, are going to be in that situation where they're not going to be able to afford it. That's just the economics of developing those new products. By definition, they are extremely expensive, and so that's so. Yes, all good ideas to improve the industry, society on its own. So I'm looking forward to listening back to this episode in 30 years and see where the world is.
Well, I'm sure you're chomping at the bit, Bruno, around anything to do with risk pooling, knowing all the ideas you've had over the years and your background and all that. So I'll be watching what you're doing and seeing what other things you come up with, that ways to reapply the industry's superpower.
Well, you're definitely paving the way here, so that's good.
So
And I also like the way you said, "Is there anybody out there?" You had just the right pause, so I can tell you're a Floyd fan.
I just wanted to highlight. I mean, obviously, a lot of great points here, but a few things that really stuck with me. A constant reminder that need does not equal demand. For any of us that are entrepreneurs, on this podcast or out in the world, I think that's something we need to remind ourselves of daily. I also like the way we started the conversation. You talked about how the nature of the business is such that conversations, however well intended, can turn into something that's much more built on sort of persuasiveness and unwanted pushiness. And that's sort of the nature of the beast, not necessarily people's intentions. I thought that was very important. And then I also like this concept of division of labor, right? Really figuring out where to draw the line between human involvement and the role of technology, which will necessarily be very important here. So thank you for that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Maria, we have talked about your books today. For our listeners, if you don't mind just listing both of those titles real quick, and then also if listeners are looking to reach out and get in touch with you, the best way to reach you, and we'll put it all in the show notes as well.
Great. So my first book was titled Flirting with the Uninterested, Innovating in the Sold Not Bought Category. That was 2012. The second book in 2025 was The Unfair Comparisons, Nuancing the Sold Not Bought Category, which is the look back on the last decade or so. My website is thinkworthy.com. That's THINKWORTHY.com. And you can reach me either through the website or you can email me at maria@mariafs.com.
Thank you very much again for joining us, and to our listeners, thank you for joining us today for another episode of That Annuity Show.
We seek to keep things simple and have your back in the years to come. Nassau is headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut. Learn more at nfg.com.